Hi everyone. This video is to introduce your last major writing project, the research essay, and also kind of talk about one of its key components, which is the annotated bibliography. So first off, to kind of get into the research essay. So this is the kind of culmination of your work in 300. Except for the final portfolio, which I'll talk about in a separate video. So in your first paper, the rhetorical analysis, you were analyzing the arguments others were making. In the second paper, the community-based argument, you were making your own argument. And now you're doing that again in the research essay, but you're doing so for a different audience. And the audience for your research essay is an audience in your field. So this is a more academic, scholarly paper that you're going to be working on. And so I want to kind of go over the expectations and the guidelines for that, so you're clear about what you'll be doing for this paper. So this is an assignment that is designed to have you participate in the conversations and contribute some sort of new knowledge to your field. Now that may sound like a big task, which in part it is, but you also don't have to change the world with this argument either. It can be an argument about seeing things in a new way, maybe kind of taking one step in a new direction or practice. And really, it's open in terms of topic as to what you're going to get into. And it should be something relevant and kind of current within your field, but also should be something that you're interested and invested in some way, because that's kind of pretty important here. So with that in mind, I want to kind of go over the assignment sheet and kind of talk about some of the specifics. So if you look at the assignment sheet on D2L and you look over the description, you'll notice that it talks about a couple of different approaches. So one approach, in both cases, this is in part an argument to inform. You're informing your audience about the issue that you're talking about, the topic that you're focusing on in the paper. You're thinking about the different perspectives and kind of what's going on there. And that's kind of one of the key things. Now, you might have one of two potential goals. So one might be to convince your audience to see things in a new way, which is definitely an important kind of approach, and one that we've looked at a lot of different examples throughout the course that do this kind of stuff. The second approach might be to be more persuasive, to offer a course of action, which can also be a good argument. That's one of the ones that we're most kind of familiar with. Usually are proposal arguments, which lay out a course of action. Here's what we can do to solve this problem, or here's what we can do to address this issue. And a lot of times it might just be, here's a new way to do things, right? Or here's a new approach we can try out. So your ultimate take on the argument, what you want to achieve is really depends on you and your topic and what you want to add to this conversation. So it is going to be heavily research-based. You're going to be pulling on several scholarly sources. You can pull on some other sources as well, but this is to really get you writing for an audience in your field. And so the expectations are there that you're going to have the research to back up your claims and support your argument. So your goal is to, as I said, to convince or persuade that audience. And so this means that you need strong sources, not just academic sources, but other sources that help really kind of flesh out your whole argument. And so you'll notice kind of under the assignment, you'll notice the description where it says, in this assignment, you'll be utilizing the style and conventions consistent within your major field, and your paper should understand and work within these conventions. So whereas in the first two papers, you were writing in MLA, in this paper, you have the opportunity, and you should be writing in the style of your field. So that might be APA, that could be Chicago or Turabian, AMA, or potentially another type of academic style. So that's partially to model kind of the expectations that your audience would have. So if you're writing for an audience of nurses or an audience of biologists, right, they're going to have specific conventions and expectations that they're looking for. So so that's part of your topic paragraph, as I'll touch on again in a few minutes, is talking about the style and the format you're going to be using for this paper. The goal here, you notice in italics, ultimately, is that you'll be arguing to inform your audience of the importance and relevance of your specific issue. So in other words, why does this matter for your audience? Why should they care about what it is you're arguing about? And either convince the audience of your view on the issue and your new take or approach on it, or you might do both, or propose a feasible solution to the issue. You don't have to write a proposal. Again, this goes a lot. This really goes back to your topic and what you choose to write on for this paper. So what to do, what not to do. As with the community-based argument, this is a research-intensive paper, so you need a lot of sources to support your claims. And it is really important that in academic writing, you'll notice Your research should be support. The argument should always be yours. The claim should always be yours. So it should be your voice throughout the argument. And then your sources should be backing up your claims. They should be evidence to really kind of show your audience, you know what you're talking about. You have proof to support the claims that you're making. When writing for an audience in your field, or some questions will come up, obviously. So what does your audience know, right? Well, you can assume that an audience in your field is going to know a lot about your topic. So you can have that expectation when writing your paper. A good rule here is, if you're not sure, is if you look at several of your sources and they're all talking about a particular term, and every source seems to assume that the audience knows what that term means, then you can probably assume that you're safe to do the same thing. If not, it's probably good to kind of define specific terms and jargon for your reader, or if there's multiple definitions and you're talking about a certain one, you definitely want to lay that out early in the paper and say, here's the definition I'm using. So that's something to keep in mind, and you can always err on the safe side. And if you aren't sure, go ahead and cite a source and back it up. Nobody's going to punish you for that. So the assignment goals here are to think critically about concepts and issues relevant to your major field of research, to demonstrate effective and balanced research methods and use of outside research, and to apply rhetorical strategies in the construction of an academic argument. So this is really taking what you've been working on in units 1 and 2 for the most part and putting that into an academic mindset and paper. So you'll notice the source requirement reflects this. For this paper, you need to find more sources, and it's a longer paper. You need to have at least 8 outside sources. 5 of those need to be academic sources, either journal articles or book chapters or books in the field that talk about your topic. They need to be peer-reviewed. You should be finding them through the Maybe Library databases. Don't forget, we do have the option, and this is something you need to do a little bit early on in the process when you're finding sources, but you have the option to get sources that we don't have through our own databases through interlibrary loan. And usually if you have an article that you find and you can't get access to it through our databases, if you request it through interlibrary loan, they'll usually get it to you pretty quickly. So the other 3 sources can be scholarly. They can be more general, kind of depends on your topic as to what those other sources are. They should help to kind of flesh out your whole body of research. Now, again, depending on your topic and what you choose, you got to keep in mind how recent scholarship is. You may have to look a little bit broader or a little bit farther back in terms of the peer-reviewed articles. So keep that in mind. So all your sources in this paper need to be integrated and cited in the body of the paper. And then on your works cited, references, bibliography page, kind of whatever the requirement is for the style you're using, you need to make sure they're cited throughout the paper correctly and on an appropriate page that lists all the in-text citations. Now, one of the questions that often comes up for this paper is selecting a topic. So how do you do that? Well, ideally, you are working in your field. So you're taking classes in that area. So, hopefully some things come up there, right? So there are issues you might have kind of thought about or gotten into in other classes that might be a good starting point for thinking. But it needs to be focused. It needs to be something that's current and relevant to your field of research or your major. It needs to be, remember that it needs to present your specific view. So this has to be an issue that is debatable and or controversial in some way, right? It isn't something that everybody just kind of says, yes, we all agree the sky is blue. That's not you can't really make an argument about that. So if you are making a persuasive argument, if you're putting a proposal forth, keep in mind that you have to be able to offer some sort of course of action that is feasible for the audience. So you can't tell the audience, well, we can get rid of global warming, climate change tomorrow if we just all stop driving cars, right? Because would that solve the problem? Maybe. Would that be a feasible solution? Not really. So this is, as I mentioned, it's a more intensive, it's a longer paper. It's kind of the culmination of the course. So this, the length reflects that. So this is a paper of at least 2,000 words. So 2,000 words minimum in the body of the paper, 25,000 words, or 2,500 words, sorry. 2,000 min, 2,500 max is the range you're shooting for. Again, this paper should be formatted in the style of your chosen academic citational style. But you should have the same basic format as with all the papers, 1-inch margins, 12-point times Roman calligraphy font, all that kind of stuff. So it's because it's a longer paper, the unit also reflects that for this third unit. There's more time for you to work on the paper, and in particular, the annotated bibliography is designed to help get you there, which I'll talk about more in a couple minutes. But what I'm looking for in this paper, that you focus on a specific rhetorical purpose, so you have a clear argument, and it's clear you're convincing and or persuading your audience of your argument throughout. You're exploring the multiple facets of the issue. Now, this could be ideological, social, cultural, political, economic, historical. And I don't expect you to explore all of these facets of the issue, but one or two of them probably. And really, this is kind of saying, why does this matter, right? So why should your audience care about this argument? What investment should they have? Why, what is the new knowledge you're trying to add to this conversation? So, the paper should conduct inquiry-based research and writing which is driven by a desire to study an issue relevant to your major field of study. So that research is serving a real purpose here, not just to kind of help you learn about the issue, but really make a strong argument and have evidence to support your claims. And then if you're providing a proposal, it should provide an acceptable and feasible proposal. If it's convincing your audience, it should be clearly convincing. It should be a strong argument throughout that really makes your case to your reader. So you'll notice the point breakdown's a little bit different for this paper because some of the requirements are a little bit bigger. So the paper is 115 points total. The topic paragraph is 5 points, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon. So check the due dates in the Dropbox on D2L for more directions on that. One of the things you'll be doing after your topic paragraph is the annotated bibliography, which I'm going to come back to again in just a minute and talk about a little bit more. But that is going to be a list of all your sources for the paper that you think you're going to use, and annotated. So in other words, kind of broken down and really kind of understood and kind of tied together. So it's a kind of a big setup for your draft. Now the draft, this is a full draft that is expected of you for this paper. So it needs to be, the body of the paper needs to be at least 2,000 words. And this is because the peer review activity for this unit especially is about a lot of not just following academic citation and style, which is necessary for writing for an academic audience, but also having a clear, strong argument. So if you have a partial draft, it's really hard for your classmates to be able to actually respond to and answer all the questions as they should be. In terms of the final draft itself, so the full draft is 10 points. The final draft, again, content is 50 points. So that's the biggest thing I'm looking for, is the strength of your argument. But kind of going with that is organization, which is 10 points. Academic formatting and citations, so that you follow the rules of your field. You are citing your sources correctly. You have a works cited bibliography references page, whatever you need. That's 10 points. And then grammar and mechanics, again, are 5 points. So the due dates for all this are up on D2L, and you can definitely, and you should be looking at that and kind of planning ahead. Now, as I mentioned, the unit, you start off, it's a little bit longer, this last unit, to kind of reflect the length and scope of this paper. You're going to start off with a couple of learning activities in the first week or so, the first week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And then really you're going to turn to the annotated bibliography, which is, there's an assignment sheet for the annotated bibliography up on D2L that you should definitely look at. It is up there with the research essay assignment sheet. So both sheets are there, and you can kind of look over each one and get a sense of the expectations. So if you haven't done an annotated bibliography before, what it is really an opportunity to find and engage with a bunch of different sources ahead of actually writing your paper, and kind of get a sense about what are the current conversations being had about an issue, what does the research reflect. And so this is different. An annotated bibliography is different from kind of just a brief summary of your sources, or just a list of citations, and that you're looking at all your sources and you're starting to think about the connections, where people agree or disagree, what are maybe some gaps in the argument or the conversations being had, and kind of how really the annotated bibliography should give a pretty clear sense about how the sources you found are going to inform the argument that you're writing in the research essay. So for the annotated bibliography, you're going to have to find all 8 of your sources. So again, that's 5 academic sources, and then 3 other sources. They could be academic, they could be otherwise. Now, one of the things that often comes up is this question of when you do your sources for the annotated bibliography, are these the sources you're ultimately locked into? And no, that isn't the case. So you might do the annotated bibliography, have found a list of sources, and as you start drafting and writing the actual research essay, realize, oh, 2 of these sources aren't relevant, or they kind of do the same thing for me, and I need to find 2 other sources. So it's fine if your sources in the research essay itself don't reflect the annotated bibliography sources. That's okay. This is all part of that process. But an annotated bibliography is about, in writing annotations in particular, is about a combination of kind of summarizing and analyzing sources and thinking about their relationships to one another. So on the annotated bibliography assignment sheet, there's kind of a brief rundown of annotations and what they should look like for this assignment. And I do want to point out that you might have written an annotated bibliography in another class, you might do it in another class later. The expectations may always be different. So be aware that, you're writing towards the expectations that the professor sets out for you. So what I'm looking for is annotations of 5 to 9 sentences that are generally an equal balance of summary and analysis. So this is not a in-depth overview of every single point of every source. And indeed, it's really kind of a quick couple of sentences summary to kind of tell us, here's what this is specifically about. Maybe here's the argument they're making, or here's the research they present. And then analyzing it and explaining its relevance to your argument. So I should be able to look at an annotation and say, here's what it's about, here's how it's going to contribute to your argument in some way. One of the questions you should obviously be answering in that annotation is the credibility of the source. Now, this doesn't need to be incredibly in-depth, right? But, so-and-so from the Yale Business School, or so-and-so professor of economics at Arizona State, right? Something to give us a sense about the credibility of the author or authors and the source. So it should be clear what the credibility of each source is, what it's about, and how it fits into your argument. You might, depending on the sources you find in your results, you might talk about connections, right? Maybe 2 people are kind of supporting the same point. Maybe a couple of people, really disagree with one another, and you can kind of say, well, source A and source B are kind of presenting very different views on the issue. But what you get into is kind of dependent on what your sources ultimately reveal to you in that process. So there are several links on the assignment sheet to the Purdue OWL, the University of Toronto, and Cornell University with more tips about writing annotated bibliographies. I've linked to these on D2L as well, but they're good to look at if you're not kind of sure what one looks like. There's also a template and guide for annotated bibliographies up on D2L, so you can check that as well. So in terms of the sources, the assignment sheet also gets a little bit more into that kind of source requirement. So you need those 8 sources. Really, you want to try to shoot for at least 3 different types of sources. So whether that's books, academic journal articles, maybe websites, interviews, magazine, newspaper articles, you want some sort of variety. So again, what that variety is depends a whole lot on your topic. So there's a lot of kind of leeway there, but you want to make sure you have some variety there. So all the sources should be credible, so you should know and trust the author of the source. If not personally, obviously, then you know where it's coming from and that it's credible. It needs to be relevant, so it should obviously relate to your topic. And one thing to keep in mind is don't rely on titles of an article or a work to necessarily tell you whether it's actually relevant or not, because you may encounter, and probably will, a title for a source that sounds like it applies to what you're talking about, but really ultimately has nothing to do with what you're getting into. And so they need to be varied as well. And that's important to explore the different facets of the issue. So different viewpoints, what are the counter arguments? What are maybe alternative hypotheses about how we should see this argument? So in terms of the grading criteria for the annotated bibliography portion of the assignment, that's, again, it's 25 points of that 115 points on your research essay grade. Looking that you have the annotations for each of the 8 sources, 5 of them at least are academic sources. Each one is preceded by the proper citation, full citation, depending on your style, and that your annotations establish the credibility of your source and provide the summary and analyze each source and its relevance to what you're talking about. So So the annotated bibliography, there are a couple days. There's one day where you have a particular activity that you're going to find a couple news sources in it and work on drafting an annotation. There's I believe, at least one work day, if not two, just for working on the annotated bibliography before it's due. So this is to give you an opportunity to really work on not just finding your sources, but kind of reading through them, starting to put that body of research together. So once you finish the annotated bibliography and start turning your attention towards the research essay draft itself, that's going to give you an opportunity to say, I've already got this research, or I've got a kind of good idea about what I'm going to be talking about, or the conversations that are happening. So that's kind of the idea behind this unit. Is you'll start off with a couple learning activities early on, then really turn your attention for, I believe, 2 weeks to the annotated bibliography, and then turn your attention from there to the research essay. So again, all those dates are up on D2L. There's, as always, there's more specific details with each of the drop boxes in each kind of day where you're working on different parts of the assignment. But please, as always, if you have questions about the assignment, whether it's the research essay or the annotated bibliography, along the way, let me know. I'm glad to as always, set up a meeting, whether on campus or via Skype or Zoom. If you want to talk about a draft, if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to what you're all are going to get into on this last essay. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Let me know if you have any questions.